Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf kuf tefav. The central focus of today's daf is going to be what is the source for the fact that one cannot eat basar b'chalav and one cannot benefit from basar b'chalav. If you recall, the pasuk just says 3 times, right? The 3 different psukim: Lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo. Don't cook the meat in mother's milk. But it doesn't ever say don't eat it, don't benefit. So we started with Rav Ashi yesterday, who said that the source is lo tochal kol toeva, anything that is despicable to you, because you're not allowed to cook milk and meat, that becomes despicable to God. Kol sheti'avti lecha, anything that I made despicable to you, meaning it's despicable to God, then you are not allowed to eat. Where do we learn you can't benefit? Which we said, he must learn it, what Rav Ashi, who says that the source for the prohibition to eat is from the pasuk lo tochal kol toeva, must learn isur hana'ah from the fact that Rabbi Yavahu says anywhere where it says don't eat, it includes don't benefit unless it otherwise says so, like it does by nevela. That's where we ended yesterday's daf. Today we're going to have a series of difficulties on Rav Ashi 5 from different sources that also seem to be cases where God said you can't do this, and yet the product of it is allowed to be eaten. So that's what we have at the bottom of Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amud Bet. We have a siman, Shabbat, Choresh, Kiles Ra'im, Otov et Beno, V'Shiluach HaKen. Okay, those are the 5 cases we're going to use, and we'll go through them one by one right now. So if that's the case, let's say one cooks something that's forbidden on Shabbat, or cooking something on Shabbat, which is forbidden to do. It should be forbidden to eat forever. Now, there happens to be a machloket about what exactly is the status of this food and who can't eat it when. The one who did it can't benefit from it not on Shabbat and not even after Shabbat, or there's all different opinions about exactly where, what. But the fact is, there's definitely no prohibition for other people to benefit from it after Shabbat. Okay? So, basically, we should say, Dahati afti lechahu, right? That's a case where God says, this is despicable, you're not allowed to do it, you get punished if you do it, and yet you're allowed to eat the food. So, how can we explain that? And like we're going to do with all these cases, we're going to say that's an exception to the rule because of, in this case, we're going to have a pasuk we're going to learn it from. Amar kra ki kodesh hi lachem, which is about Shabbat. He kodesh ve'ema aseh kodesh. Shabbat is sanctified, but things that are created on Shabbat are not sanctified. Now, the word kodesh is used here in 2 different ways. In the first part, it's used as Shabbat is sanctified. In the second case, the kadosh means, kadosh is something that you have to separate from, or that is separated, is different. Right? Like kadosh is different from chol, it's separated out, it's unique. So when it says Ma'aseh Kadosh, it means you don't have to actually separate from Ma'aseh Shabbat, meaning you're allowed to benefit from them. Again, not on Shabbat, but later you can. Okay, that resolved question number 1. Question number 2. Choresh b'shor b'chamor. Okay, we're going to talk about 2 prohibitions now. They're going to come up twice in today's daf. One is to plow with 2 different types of animals together. That's forbidden. And the next one is Choseim pi para v'dashba. While you're having the animal thresh your grains, you're not allowed to muzzle the animal and prevent them from eating. So, let's say you plowed a field with your donkey and your ox, or you muzzled the mouth of your cow while the cow was threshing. Li tasru, what comes out of there, meaning whatever you grew in the field then after you plowed it, or whatever was you threshed and then ended up with the grains and now took them to make your flour, you should basically not be allowed to eat it. Dahati afti lechahu, because God said this is despicable, you're not allowed to do this, and it was created by a despicable action. To which the Gemara answers, Hashtu ma Shabbat dechamira ma'aseh mutarim hani lo kol sheken. But if Shabbat is so strict and you get the death penalty for it, and it's ma'aseh, but what comes out, right, what you created on Shabbat in a forbidden manner is actually permitted. So, hani lo kol sheken. So, wouldn't you say all the more so with the choresh or b'chamor or choseim pi para? All the more so, they should be permitted. Okay, so Shabbat, we have a pasuk, and the next case we have the plowing and the threshing. we derive from Shabbat. Now this is a little bit tricky because why don't we then say, let's derive basar b'chalav from Shabbat? So Tosfot asks this question and answers that there's a big difference between basar b'chalav and these two examples. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that if you mix milk and meat, it's noticeable that there's milk and meat together in this, right? You have a cheeseburger. So that's pretty clear. You've mixed your milk with your meat. However, if you cooked your food on Shabbat or you muzzled the animal while it was threshing, that product looks no different. There's no difference in the product, actually. And no one will ever be able to see that this product was made on Shabbat or this product was made while you muzzled your animal. Nobody would know that, right? So because it's not recognizable, it's in a completely different category. And that's why we can learn that one from the other, but we're not going to then learn back to their basar b'chalav, where the item itself is an item of, inherently, it's forbidden. You have to mix milk and meat. As opposed to you've cooked something and you just cooked it on the wrong day. Okay? So it's a big difference there. Okay, we're on to question number 3. Kilei zra'im litaschu. What about mixed grains? Right, you're not allowed to plant mixed grains next to each other. And if you do, though, you actually can eat them. Now, there's a distinction between kilei kerem, if it was vine together with grains, then it's going to be forbidden to eat and forbidden to benefit from. But if you mix 2 grains like barley and wheat, it's actually not forbidden. But it should be, because the Torah says you can't do it. Well, midigali rachmana gabe kilei kerem pen tikdash, by specifically kilei kerem, the vineyard, and that's where I said we're more strict. It says pen tikdash. Now the pasuk there means, the way they darshan it, what is pen tukdash? Pen tukad esh, which is lest you have to come, so that you don't have to come to burn it. Meaning, by kilei zra'im, it specifically tells you, if you mix your vine and you plant it right, your grains right next to your vine, you'll have to burn it. Why do you have to burn it? That means you can't benefit from it. Michlal de kilei zra'im shavu. From here you can infer this is specifically for kilei kerem that you can't benefit, but kilei zra'im, you can benefit and you can eat. Okay, so from there again, we have a special drasha that teaches us it's only by kilei kerem it's forbidden b'hana'ah, but from here we can derive that if you mix wheat and barley, you actually will be able to eat it and benefit. So that's the answer. However, the Gemara is going to start with a few questions on this answer before we get to the next question. And as before we get to the next of our 5 cases. A very obvious question, which is that pasuk by kilei kerem, from which we derive what the law is for kilei zra'im, is specifically talking about benefit. So maybe you say those are forbidden to benefit from, and kilei zra'im you can't eat, but you can benefit. Okay, that could be a different limud, and then actually they would be forbidden, and you wouldn't be able to derive from that pasuk that they're actually permitted to eat, which is what we were trying to explain. So they say no. The reason why we know that kilei zra'im are permitted, fine, we're not going to derive it from kilei kerem. We're going to learn it from here. Itakush lekilei behema dechtiv behem techalo tarbia kilayim sadchalo tizra kilayim. We're going to make a juxtaposition between mixed crossbreeding animals and plowing your and planting your field with mixed seeds. Because they appear in the same pasuk, don't crossbreed your animals, don't plant your field with mixed grains. So what's the parallel now? Just like your animal, what comes out of it, if you crossbreed 2 animals, you're actually permitted to eat the animal that's born from that crossbreeding. So therefore, even though you're not allowed to mix 2 grains, but if you did, you're allowed to eat what comes out of it. So that's in the end the answer to our question. We tried to answer it from, it comes from a pasuk of kilei kerem. And why is kilei zra'im permitted if this principle of basar b'chalav, something's despicable and yet, right, and it's forbidden, and here it's not. We thought we could learn from Kilei HaKerem. In the end, we say, no, we learn from Kilei Behemah. Now we have to answer one more question, which is, Kilei Behemah Gufayu Menalan. How do you know that if I crossbreed two animals, I can actually eat the offspring of that other animal? Well, Mida Asr Rachmana Kilayim Legavoa Michlal de Lahedyot Shari. Since Kilayim are forbidden to bring on the altar, and that's because of the pasuk Shor o Kesef o Ez Ki Valed Vayashivat Yamim Tachanimo Ubayom Hashmini Yeratzeh Korban. If I'm quoting it right, but I think it's almost right, if not completely correct. But there it says, I'll explain in English now, a shor or a kesef or an ez, an ox or a sheep or a goat. And that's where the real drasha comes in. It has to be either a shor or a kesef, or an ez. It can't be a combination of any of them. For 7 days, it should be with its mother, and only on the 8th day, right, this is what we call, I'm going to say this because we're also going to get to this in another minute, a mechusar zman, can't yet be brought on the altar in its first 7 days of its life, but on the 8th day it can be brought. What do you see here? You can bring on the altar, once it's 8 days old and past that, a shor, a kesef, or ez, but not a combination of the two or the three. Any sort of combination is forbidden. So now that we have that drasha that's specifically by korbanot, michla, from there you can infer de lahedyot share, that for a regular person though it would be permitted. So there you see that if you crossbreed animals, it's permitted. From there we got to the seeds, and that's our answer. Difficulty number 4 in Rav Ashi. Otov et beno litzar. If you slaughter an animal and its mother in the same day, which you're not allowed to do, that we spent a lot of time on, it should be forbidden then to eat the animal, but it's not. Well, if you remember, we called Otov et beno just like we call the animal in the first 7 days of its life, mechusar zman. Meaning, once you slaughter the mother, for example, then the animal, the offspring, becomes forbidden on that day and can't be slaughtered that day. Now, we said that since the Torah, what we're saying here is the exact same parallel we made a comparison a minute ago, because the Torah forbade mechusar zman to bring on the altar. It said, listen, if it can't be brought today, you can't bring it on the altar, right? It's forbidden to bring on the altar, meaning not that you can't bring, if it's not ready yet to be brought within the first 7 days. Well, from there you can infer the lahedyot shari, that a mechusar zman is not forbidden to a regular person. Again, what does that mean in our case? If you slaughter the mother, and today you're not allowed to slaughter the offspring, but if you do it anyway, it won't be forbidden to eat. Okay? You're not allowed to do it. You transgressed, you get a punishment. But it's not forbidden to eat. Okay, last question. Shiluach haken litzar. What about shiluach haken, sending away the mother bird? Okay, Rashi explains, what are we saying? Rashi explains, like, when would the sending away the mother bird create a situation where you did something forbidden and you're now not allowed to eat it? So Rashi explains, although Rashi has 2 explanations to this, and one comes up later in a later Rashi on the page, but we're going to stick with the first one, even though Rashi actually prefers his second commentary. But he says, Kigon natala ta'em me'ala banim. You're not allowed to take the eggs while the mother's there. But what if you took the mother? Okay? Now, you're not allowed to take the mother. What you have to do is shaleach etayim. You have to send the mother away. If the mother is with her eggs, you have to send the mother bird away. What if you took the mother bird? So in doing that, you actually transgress. Okay? You're not allowed to take the mother bird. You have to send the mother bird away. But let's say you did. Uba lefanenu, and then it was before us. V'chiyavinu l'shalech. Now, at that point, the Torah commands you, send off the mother bird. But you don't do that, okay? And it's if you picked up the mother while it was with the sons, your obligation is send away the mother bird. But you didn't. So if you didn't, so what happens? It should be forbidden forever because you did a transgression. You didn't send away the mother bird, which is what you were supposed to do. So why not? It's something that God said, this is despicable. Well, Lo amra Torah shalech letakala. This is a fascinating line. If the Torah tells you send it away, let's say, according to our theory, well, it's something despicable to God. It should be forbidden. Lo tochal kol toeva. Don't eat anything despicable. So now, this bird would be forbidden to eat. However, what does the Torah command you to do? If I did pick up the bird, what do I have to do? I have to send it away. Now, if I send that bird away, what's going to happen? The bird's going to fly away. What might happen next? Someone might catch that bird, eat it. But if they eat it, it's something that's forbidden because it was something that a sin was done to, right? A transgression, something despicable. So there would lo amra Torah, the Torah would never say shalach, okay, or shalach, send this bird away litakala, if it would cause people an obstacle for people. It would actually cause people to sin because people would eat something they would never know that it was forbidden. So the fact that the Torah prescribes, if you pick up the mother, you must send it away, then that means it's obviously not forbidden. And that's why, again, that's another exception to the rule. So we're back to Rav Ashi, who said, we don't have to go back there anymore, we're done with this answer, but this basically reinstates Rav Ashi, that lo tochal kol toeva, basar b'chalav, if you cook milk and meat, it becomes a toeva, despicable to God, and because anything despicable to God cannot be eaten, even though we brought all sorts of exceptions to the rule. Now we move on to Rish Lakish. Answer number 2. Amar Rish Lakish, minayin lebasar b'chalav she'asur. How do you know basar b'chalav is forbidden? Talmud Lamal. Very strange pasuk we're going to prove here, used for proof. Korban Pesach, you might remember this. Al tochlu mimenu na uvashel mevushal. You're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to eat it. The Korban Pesach if it's raw or cooked. Notice there's a double language here. Bashel mevushal, which both mean to cook. So one of those words is unnecessary. You have to roast it. Now, if you are to eat the Korban Pesach cooked, it's prohibited. Okay, you can't eat it, you can't benefit from it. You've ruined your korban. It's what's called a psulei mukdashim, sacrifice that was ruined. Okay, and that's forbidden to benefit from and forbidden to eat. She'ein tamud lamar mevushal. Now the word mevushal is completely unnecessary, as I mentioned a minute ago. Ma tamud lamar mevushal. So what do we learn from this cooked? Lomar lecha yesh bishul lecha bishul acher shu kazeh. To teach that you have some other item that's cooked. That's just like this. That's forbidden to eat and forbidden to benefit. What is that? Ezeh basar b'chalav. What is that? It's cooking milk and meat together. And from the pasuk of the Korban Pesach that you can't cook it, from there we learn that because that's forbidden to eat and forbidden to benefit, from there, notice Rish Lakish actually learns them both together. Rav Ashi had to explain one explanation for how we know it's forbidden to eat, and from there we got to how we know it's forbidden to benefit. This would be a 2-in-1. Well, since the Korban Pesach is forbidden to eat and forbidden to benefit if you cook it, this alludes to another item that can't be cooked, like milk and meat, and it's going to be forbidden to benefit from, and forbidden to eat, and forbidden to benefit from this pasuk. Amarle Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan now attacks Rish Lakish and says to him, moving now to Amud Bet, Ke'ura zo shashana Rabbi. Is it ugly to you or despicable to you or not approved by you what Rebbe said? So Rish Lakish, okay, if we go chronologically, we started with Rav Ashi, who's usually at the end of every sugya. He's the last one because he's the one who edited, the last named person usually. Well, we go backwards in order. We go Rav Ashi, we go back to Rish Lakish, first/second generation Amoraim in Israel. Now we go back to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi of the last Tanaim. So he says, what? Did you miss what Rebbe said? Rebbe, do you not accept what Rebbe said? Rebbe said, and he's going to quote, and this is again a little bit out of context, he's going to quote Psukim in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 12, verse 25. Now there's a few sections, and there's a bit of a debate here about what each section is coming to talk about. But in Pasuk Tev Vav, it starts saying you can eat meat anytime you want. You can eat meat wherever you want. And that section seems to be talking about what we call psulei hamukdashim, which are what I just said. Well, when can you eat wherever you want? If it was a sacrifice that was disqualified, and then you redeem it, you can eat it whenever you want, just like you eat a tzvi and an ayil, which is 2 chayot, undomesticated animals, which can never be brought as sacrifices, right? Everything before them was really brought as sacrifices. Well, if something got disqualified, you can redeem it, and then you can eat it as a sacrifice. Then in Pasuk Kaf, it says again, well, when God expands your boundaries, and Amarta ochla basal ki taven nafshecha, you just stam won't eat basar. Chullin, not kodesh. Okay, you can eat meat b'chol avat nafshecha. You can eat meat anytime you want. Okay, and then it explains to you, you have to slaughter it, etc. The same way you eat the tzvi and the ayil, right? That never is sacrificed. So because they're two sections that sound very similar, they explain that the first section is referring to the disqualified sacrifices that were redeemed, and the second is talking about regular meat that somebody wants to eat. However, despite that, okay, in Pasuk Kaf He, which is the section about eating meat whenever you want, it says, and this is the pasuk we're talking about right now, Lo tochlenu, and there it says in pasuk Kaf Gimel it says Rach chazak lebilti achol adam, don't eat the blood when you eat the meat. Okay, and the blood comes up also in the section before, in the few psukim before that. It said Rak hadam lo tochlu al aretz sheshbachenu kamayim. In the Psulei Muktashim section, it said don't eat the blood. Then it says in this section, don't eat the blood again. Okay, and it says lo tochlenu again ala aretz sheshbachenu kamayim, and then it says lo tochlenu l'man yitav lecha ulevanecha acharecha ki taseh yashar b'nei Hashem. Don't eat it in order to do what's right in the name of God. Okay, well in this section, this pasuk Kaf He, which first of all you see it's repeated again, don't eat the blood, don't eat the blood. It seems a little bit extra here. Rashi says this lo tochlenu, Rashi points out that it's talking about the Psulei Mukdashim, which is what we were just talking about, even though we said, actually the previous pasuk was talking about Psulei Mukdashim. Anyway, Rashi says this pasuk is talking about Psulei Mukdashim. The Rashash asked this question because it really isn't talking about Psulei Mukdashim, but we can sort of view this, and even Pasuk Kaf He sort of looks like a bit of a summary pasuk that relates to the two previous sections. So perhaps that's a way to see it. I don't want to get too focused. It's a very detail-oriented thing that I'm mentioning here. There's a bit of a weakness in Rashi because those psukim aren't really talking about Psulei Mukdashim. But let's just go with Rashi, who says it's talking about Psulei Mukdashim, and perhaps he sees Pasuk Kaf He as a summary for the two sections. And it says there, lo tochlenu, and he says that don't eat the blood is not really talking about don't eat the blood. Why? Well, Rashi says, yetera. It's completely unnecessary because it already said, Rachadam lo tochlenu al aretz sheshbachenu kamayim. The pasuk before just said, don't eat the blood. And then this pasuk said, don't eat the blood. So it's really extra, which, by the way, is what motivates me to say that maybe that's a summary pasuk of the last two sections, because the previous section said, right, 15 to 19 said, don't eat the blood. Then 20 to 24 said, don't eat the blood. And then you have this extra pasuk, don't eat it because it's not good for you and all that. Okay? So now, this is completely unnecessary. And therefore, he says, why do we say this? It must be not for blood, because we already know that. So it's talking about basar b'chalav katuv medaber. That don't eat, it's talking about basar b'chalav. That's what Rebbe says. So the Braita continues. Where'd you get to basar v'chalav here? I get that it's extra, but where'd you get to the fact that it's talking about basar b'chalav? Maybe it's talking about don't eat anything that's forbidden by Torah law. Well, Amarta, so he answered, say ulama mishlosh midot shaTorah nidresha b'hem. We're going to use one of the 13 principles, exegetical principles that the Torah is darshan by. Davar halamem inyano. Okay, we're going to learn from not all of them, but one of them. What is that? Learn from the context. Okay, how do we get from the context to basar b'chalav? Well, b'meh katuv medaber b'shnei minim. The pasuk was talking about two types. What are the two types? Well, if we assume, like Rashi, it's talking about Psulei Mukdashim. Rashi says Psulei Mukdashim inherently are two types. Why? Well, it was Kodesh that was disqualified. Now you redeem it, it's Chullin. So theoretically, it should be one type. It should be just Chullin, non-sacred item. However, if you had an animal that was designated for a sacrifice, got disqualified, you redeem it, and then you can do what you want with the animal, but you can't really. Okay, you can slaughter it and eat it, but you can't shear it if it's a sheep, and you can't work it if it's an ox. You can't have it do your plowing for you. It on the one hand is chol, on the other hand it's sanctified. It's got both. So it's two different types together. Afkan b'shnei minim. Also here, you have to assume then, what's the pasuk referring to? Something that's similar. That's also two types that are combined. Basal b'chalav. Okay, milk and meat. So that's by the way going with Rashi's interpretation. Tosfos says, how is it like shnei minim? Because it says, as I quoted to you before, this now can be eaten like the tzvi and like the ayil. So it's like two types because it's like a deer and it's like Depends how you define Tzvi and Ayil. We talked about the different interpretations, but we'll leave it as it's like two different types. So that's a different explanation. Anyway, either which way, we assume we get it from the context. It's talking about milk and meat. So now we're back to our question. Where do we start here? Rabbi Yochanan said, Rish Lakish, how did you get the basar b'chalav is asur because al tuchlu mimenu na v'shel mevushal from the Korban Pesach? Did you just ignore what Rebbe said, that it's learned out from the pasuk about the blood, lo tochlenu, must be talking about basar b'chalav, because that pasuk is completely unnecessary. To which the Gemara answers, or Rish Lakish answers, if I learned it from Rebbe, if you remember, I pointed this out when we saw Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish's advantage was that you could learn both eating and benefiting, because the Korban Pesach, that is cooked, can't be eaten, you can't benefit from. So he says, if you would just learn it from Rebbe, that would only teach you lo tochlenu, don't eat it, but you'd still be missing, don't benefit. And that's why it's not like I ignored what Rebbe said, but I found a pasuk that actually you could learn from it both. So now we have to figure out one other thing here, which is Rebbe, who learned don't eat means don't eat basar b'chalav. Where does he learn? Rebbe bahana aminale. Where does he get the prohibition, the fact that you can't benefit from it? Nafkale mehach. He learns it from a different pasuk. Ne'emal kan ki am kadosh atala Hashem. That's the pasuk about don't eat the nevela and lo tevashel gdi b'chalev imo. Right, the one that combined both those in the same pasuk. Don't cook milk and meat, and also don't eat animals that die on their own. And in the middle of that pasuk, it said, because you are a holy nation. V'ne'amar lahalan, and in a different pasuk, it says lo yeh kadesh b'bnei Yisrael. You shouldn't have prostitutes in the Jewish people. Now, ma lahalan b'hana'ah. Now, not having a prostitute is, what's a prostitute, right? What you can't benefit from a prostitute. What kind of benefit do you get? It's not eating a prostitute. It's benefiting from a prostitute. So, afkan b'hana'ah. So, just like the pasuk kadesh about the prostitute is forbidden to benefit, also our pasuk must be forbidden to benefit. Okay, because in the context of don't cook milk and meat, it uses the kadosh. So just to summarize before we move on to see some more interpretations, we have Rav Ashi who says we're going to get it from lo tochal kol toeva, and the benefit is, well, anytime it says don't eat, it also means don't benefit. We have Rav Rish Lakish who learns it from Korban Pesach, the bashel mevushal, that extra word mevushal is talking about bishul, something else that's cooked that's forbidden. And that gets you also benefit and also forbidden to eat. Rebbe learns it from lo tochlenu, the pasuk about the blood, which can't be talking about that because it already said blood, so it must be in something else. We learn from the context it's two types. We'll learn to hear about two types of basar b'chalav is forbidden to eat. And the forbidden to benefit is from the Gzera Shava, this verbal analogy between Am Kadosh and Lo Yeh Kadesh. Comes Debei Rabbi Elazar, I think it's Elazar Tana. So now we bring a Braita. So now we're going back again to the Tanaitic time period. Lo tochlu kol nevela, if you remember, and then it says don't cook the milk in the meat in its mother's milk. Amra Torah, and there it said also in the middle of the pasuk, sell it to a non-Jew. Well, and then it says sell it to a non-Jew and don't cook it in its mother's milk. Kishetimkerena lo tivashlena v'timkerena. Well, the way they read this Braita reads the pasuk, when you sell it to a non-Jew that you can benefit from it, well, don't cook it and then sell it. And what do you learn from here? Not about the prohibition to eat, but the prohibition to benefit. You can sell an avela as long as you don't mix it with its mother's milk and then try to sell it, because then already it's going to be forbidden to benefit. And that's why all those things are in the same pasuk. So that's answer number 4, but answer number 4, again, doesn't relate to not eating, it only relates to not benefiting. And finally, we get to Debei Rabbi Yishmael, answer number 5. In the house of Rabbi Yishmael, Tana, lo tevashel gdi b'chalev imo shalosh pa'amim. It says it 3 times, you ready? We've been waiting for this one. Echad li'isur achila, one to forbid it by eating. Echad li'isur na'ah, one to forbid it by benefiting. Ve'echad li'isur bishul, and one to say you also transgress the prohibition by just cooking it. Okay, and there you see also the eating and also the benefiting from the fact that it appears 3 times. Now we get to answer number 6, our final answer. Tanya Isi ben Yehuda Omer. So in a Braita it says, Isi ben Yehuda says, Minayin lebasar b'chalav sha'asur. How do we know it's forbidden? Ne'emal kan ki am kadosh ata, because you're a sanctified people and a sanctified nation. That was the pasuk about the nevela and the basar b'chalav. V'ne'emar lahalan, and it says in a different pasuk, anshe kodesh tiyun li ubasar b'sadet chayfa lo tuchelu. Okay, same idea. Am kadosh, anshe kodesh. Okay, you're sanctified people. And don't eat treifa that you find in a field. Okay, or really any treifa. We've started on this pasuk already. But what's the verbal analogy we're going to make here? Because it says anshe kodesh there and it says am kadosh by our pasuk. Ma lahalan asur. Well, treifa, what does it say? Don't eat. Afkan asur. Also here it will be forbidden. Okay, now that teaches you what though? We're used to this already. Only achila. It says don't eat. Treifa is only forbidden to eat, not to benefit. You can benefit from a treifa. So how do you know I can't benefit? Amarta kal v'chomer. And now we're going to start a long sugya about this kal v'chomer. Okay? Brace yourselves. We're going to start today, finish it tomorrow. Well, we're going to make a kal v'chomer here. Uma orla shelone evda ba'avera asura b'hana'ah. Now, orla is plant a tree. The first 3 years, you can't eat the fruits. Now, you actually don't do any transgression by planting an orla tree, right? There was no transgression done to create the orla. You actually planted a tree, which is a great thing to do. And yet, it's asura b'hana'ah, but it's forbidden to benefit from. So, basal b'chalav, so in other words, creating the fruits was no problem. It was only eating it that was the problem. But basar b'chalav, but if you cooked milk and meat, nevda ba'avera, that in and of itself, the cooking is forbidden. So, eino din shasur b'hana'ah, wouldn't you then assume that it's going to be forbidden to benefit from? Okay, you can make a kal v'chomer from orla, to which the Gemara, the Braita starts to say, wait a minute, this kal v'chomer doesn't really work. Because mala orla has a stringency that's not in it. We tried to say it has a leniency, because no prohibition was even done to it, as opposed to basar b'chalav, where it was. But orla has some difficulty, which is what? Mala orla, sheken lo hayta la shata kosher. It was never permitted yet, whereas basar b'chalav, well, the meat was permitted and the milk was permitted. It only became forbidden once you cooked it together. As opposed to orla, which at this point in the first 3 years, it's never been permitted. It'll only be permitted later down the line. So it's got a stringency. Well, the Gemara is going to say that stringency doesn't bother us. Chametz b'Pesach yuchiach, because chametz on Pesach will prove. We'll say why. Sha'ita lo shata kosher. It has shata kosher, meaning it could have been eaten before Pesach. You have bread on the 13th of Nisan, you can eat it. It was permitted, and yet chametz, when it's on Pesach, asur b'hana'ah, you can't benefit from it at all. So what do you see here? The issue of the chumrah, the stringency that exists in orla, that it never was able to be eaten, is obviously not the stringency that causes it to be forbidden to benefit, because chametz Pesach doesn't have that stringency and it's forbidden to benefit. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute, that's not a good knockout, because you could say, mal chametz b'Pesach, it has its own stringency. Sheken anush karet, that you get karet for it. So it's got its own stringency, and because it's got its own stringency, maybe that's the stringency that caused it to be asur b'hana'ah. So they come and they say, no. Kilei kerem yochichu. We're back to the kilei kerem, the planting your vine next to your grains, which in that case we said is forbidden to benefit. And that will prove, because ein anush karet, because that doesn't have karet associated with it, v'asur b'hana'ah. So basically the stringency that was in, let's just summarize, the stringency that was in orla that never had shata kosher doesn't exist by chametz b'Pesach, because that had a shata kosher and is forbidden anyway to benefit. So we cross out that one. The stringency of Pesach is, it has karet, but that stringency is knocked out by kilei kerem, which doesn't have karet. Now you might be wondering, neither does orla. Why don't we just use orla and Pesach together and knock out each of the stringencies, each one knocks out the other, and get to what we call a bama tzad, which is what's the tzad hashaveh, what's the common denominator, right? Because each chumrah knocked out the other. So we'll get there soon. They are going to ask that question. But right now we have chametz knocked out the stringency of orla, and kilei kerem knocked out the stringency of Pesach, and therefore in the end, you can have a kal v'chomer. Okay? So now the Gemara is going to ask, and then from the Kal V'chomer you're going to learn, well, these are forbidden to benefit, and therefore also Basar B'chalav will be forbidden to benefit because Basar B'chalav is even, right, these are more lenient than Basar B'chalav because Basar B'chalav itself, right, again, what was this Kal V'chomer based on? It was nevda ba'avera, right, something was done to it, right, so as opposed to Orla, which was a nevda ba'avera, and from there we built up the other cases. But it's a little bit confusing, this Kal V'chomer. As you see, I kind of got stuck in that last sentence because it's not exactly clear in the end where we're learning it from. Okay? But in the end, we're going to learn it. It sounds kind of like the combination of these three, which are all forbidden to benefit. From there, forget about the details of nevdaba, lo nevdaba. We can take from those details and say, this is, Basar B'chalav is anyway no different, really. Okay, no different from all those and doesn't have any stringency over the three of them together. But you'll see later the Gemara, somewhat for at least a short period of time, is going to view it as if the drasha was really learned from Kilei HaKerem. So keep that in mind, although you don't need it in your mind just yet. So now the Gemara says two questions. The first is, Lama li gzera shava? Why do you need the original gzera shava? Now, what did we do in this section? Let's just remember, because we got a little sidetracked. First, we said, Am kadosh and anshe kodesh tiyun li, masar b'sadeh trefa lo tuchlu. From there, we have a verbal analogy to trefa to learn it's forbidden to eat. Then, how do you get benefit? From, let's just call it the combination of these three. They're all forbidden to benefit. Likewise, our case is all forbidden to, Basar B'chalav is forbidden to benefit. But those three that we mentioned, Chametz B'Pesach, Orla, and Kilei HaKerem, also can't be eaten. Which means you don't really need the verbal analogy, because you could have learned the benefit, it's forbidden to benefit, and it's forbidden to eat, from the Kal V'chomer of those three, from the combination drasha from the combination B'mehatzad, as we call it, or something like that. I don't want to call it that. You'll see why later, because it's going to get a little bit complicated. But from the combination of those three, we should be able to learn to Basar B'chalav, not only it's forbidden to benefit, also forbidden to eat. So why do we bother with Gzera Shava in the first place? So now they say, well, right, Leite Kula B'Kal V'chomer Mi Orla. You could have learned the whole thing from B'Kal V'chomer from Orla, even though we didn't learn it all from B'Kal V'chomer from Orla. What they seemingly mean to mean is the Kal V'chomer between Orla, Chametz B'Pesach, and Kilei HaKerem, to which they say, well, Ma Orla Shalom Nevda Ba'avira Asura Bein Ba'achila Bein Ba'ana. Right, so here goes their suggested Kal V'chomer, just like Orla, which didn't have anything done to it, any sin, and yet it's forbidden to eat and to benefit. Basar B'chalav Shnevda Ba'avira Eino Din Shasur Bein Ba'achila Bein Ba'ana. So Basar B'chalav, where you did do a transgression, wouldn't it be obvious then that it would be forbidden also to eat and also to benefit? That all is just explaining what the question is. Well, mishum di'ika lememar choresh b'shor u'bechamor v'chosein pipara v'dash ba'yochiach. Now we're going to say we could have a knockout to that. And again, going back to something we learned in the beginning of the daf, if you plow with a shore and do right now, how does that compare to Orla? You plow with a shore and an ox and a donkey together. That's forbidden. And yet, not only are you not forbidden to benefit from what's planted there, but you're not even forbidden to eat it. Okay? So, choresh b'shor b'chamor v'chosein pipara v'dashba, or, muzzling your animal while it's threshing, yochiach, shnevda be'em avera usharu. All those, sin was done to them, and they were permitted. So what do you see here? They're permitted to eat. So you couldn't have learned the prohibition to eat from Orla and the others, because it would have gotten knocked out by these other two cases, which are not even forbidden to eat. Now you say, why don't we use them to knock out forbidden to benefit? Because once we have two categories, we have items that are completely permitted even to eat, and obviously then they're not going to be forbidden to benefit from. But then we have, and if you would try to learn Basar B'chalav from Orla, you could have knocked it out from the others that you can't eat it. But once we establish through Gzera Shava that Basar B'chalav is forbidden to eat, then you can't learn anything from Chosein Pipara and the Choresh B'Shor B'Chamor, because once it's forbidden to eat, it's much easier to tack on an Isser Hana'ah. You can't benefit. And you can no longer compare it to those other cases because those other cases actually are permitted to eat. So that's why we need the Gzeira Shava, to get it to the place where it's forbidden to eat. From there, we can learn from this comparison to the other three that it's also forbidden to benefit from. Okay, so that was question number one. But now we get to question number two, which is what I mentioned before, is kind of difficult to this sugya, which is, why did you need to bring in that third case of Kilei HaKerem? Lema or Letochiach? Why don't you just say, there was a stringency by Orla, right, or it was a leniency, lo nevda b'avera, and still it's forbidden to benefit from. So, and then we said, b'chametz b'pesach will prove that that's not relevant. And then we said, b'chametz b'pesach has karet. So why don't we say Orla tochiach, because Orla doesn't have karet. And then we would say the following, v'lehadar dina, and then go back to the original kavachomer and say, v'leite b'matzad. We can learn it from the least common denominator here. What's in common between the two, right? What's in common between Kilei HaKerem? Between Chametz B'Pesach and Orla is, even though, right, one lo nevda b'avera, one has karet, but those neutralize each other. And then, what's the common denominator? They're both forbidden to eat, and they're forbidden to benefit. So Basar B'Chalav, which is forbidden to eat, wouldn't you think it would be forbidden to benefit? Why are we bringing Kilei HaKerem? So Amar Rav Ashi, Mishum de'ika l'meimer nevela tochiach. Rav Ashi says you could say nevela will disprove the theory, because if the whole theory is if it's forbidden to eat, then it must be forbidden to benefit. But nevela isn't. Nevela is forbidden to eat, and it's not forbidden to benefit. Shasura b'achila mutar b'ana'at. Forbidden to eat, but permitted to benefit. So that's why you can knock it out from there. Well, Rav Mordechai doesn't like this. Amar le Rav Mordechai le Rav Ashi. That's not a good answer. Because this is what they say in the name of Rish Lakish. Kol mehatzad. Now, he comes with these rules. If you have a mahatzad, migufo prachina, and if you want to knock out a kal v'chomer and a kal v'chomer that morphs into a mahatzad, what's the common denominator between these two? And from there, you can learn to something else that's similar. Migufo prachina. And if you want to say, but you can't learn from those two because they have something unique about them that doesn't exist in the other, meaning there's something unique in Orla and Pesach, Chametz B'Pesach, that doesn't exist in Basar B'Chalav, you can knock it out like that. But Rav Ashi's knockout is not that kind of knockout. Me'alma lo prachinan. He brings a difficulty from the theory from some other completely different case, nevela, an animal, right, an animal's carcass. You don't do that. You can't knock out a matzad. If you say these two are similar, and we're going to learn from it a third thing, well, you can't knock it out from bringing in a fourth thing, not connected. It doesn't work to do that. You can only knock it out by saying, but these two have something unique that isn't in the third. So that's why that can't explain, because you could have knocked it out by nevela. By the way, I didn't explain this, but Rav Ashi, what his theory was that since nevela doesn't fit the rule, 2 wouldn't be enough to prove it. That's why they brought in Kilei HaKerem as a third. Once you have 3, that'll really overpower the nevela, which is 1, and then you'd be able to say, okay, we can learn it from the combination of the 3 to Basar B'Chalav. But Rav Mordechai doesn't like this because it doesn't fit in with Rish Lakish's rules of the game. The rules of the game are, if you're going to knock out a b'mahatzad, you can only knock it out from something that's unique to those 2, or those 3, or however many there are, but not from some other case completely. Okay, to which the Gemara says, fine. Ihachi teite b'mehatzad. So then, but why didn't you just bring it from a b'mehatzad? If what Rish Lakish is saying is right, and there's no way to knock it out, because you can't knock it out from nevela, then they should have, again, back to question 1. Then why did we bring in Kilei HaKerem? In the end, if you couldn't knock it out by nevela, then you would have the Chametz B'Pesach and Orla, and the combination of the 2 should teach you. We don't have a pircha, right? Because the pircha was from nevela. So we're back to square 1. Well, the answer, Mishum De'ika L'Mifrach, Ma'ala Tzad HaShaveh Sheben Shekein Gidulei Karka. No. Here's the pircha from within. What's the pircha from within? These 2 have something unique to them that doesn't exist by Basar B'Chalav. They are things that grow from the ground. And Basar and Chalav are not things that grow from the ground, milk and meat. So, Orla and Chametz B'Pesach, right? Chametz B'Pesach comes from grains. They're both from the ground. Now, this is something here we're going to come up with categories. First, we started with a question from the outside. Now we have a question from within, right? A difficulty from within, which isn't like a chumrah or a kula. It's not like this is stringent because of gidulei karka. It's just a feature. There's a unique feature of them that doesn't exist in basar b'chalav. So maybe there, that would knock it out, right? So then you can't learn it from the combination of the two because you can knock it out and say, oh, but those two are things that grow from the ground. That's why they brought in kilei hakerem. Okay, you might realize the next question is then obvious. Also, kilei hakerem grow from the ground. So how did this combination of the three, and how did kilei hakerem resolve that problem? If the problem the Gemara is suggesting right now, by the way, this is the stam Gemara. First it started off with Rav Ashi, who gave a suggestion. Rav Mordechai rejected it. Now the stam Gemara, we don't know who's speaking. So, right, returns to the original question. What's kilei hakerem doing there? You could have learned it from the combination. Can't learn it from the combination of those two because they're both things that grow from the ground. So that's why they brought in kilei hakerem. But kilei hakerem also grows from the ground. That doesn't make any sense. Kilei hakerem grows from the ground. The three of them grow from the ground, in which case we could say you can't learn from those three to basar b'chalav. To which now we bring in, and it's a little confusing where all of a sudden he comes in, but Rav Mordechai now says to Rav Ashi, again the same type thing as he said before, but a little bit different. Amar le Rav Mordechai le Rav Ashi. Hachi amrina mishmei de Rish Lakish. Now here he says, this is what they said in the Rish Lakish. It almost sounds like he's updating or correcting or adding to what he said before. More rules. Kol mehatzad prachinan kol tehu. If you have a mahatzad, now you might recall, we didn't use a mahatzad here. Mahatzad is the common denominator, right? Now we tried to say, why didn't they just use the common denominator between Pesach and Chametz on Pesach and Orla? In the end, they just end up with saying, kilei hakerem will prove it, okay, but they don't use a mahatzad. So they say, if it was a mahatzad, then you could be parchin and kol tehu and say, oh, if you're using the least common denominator argument, but if those three things that have the least common denominator is this, and we want to learn something else, but those three things all have a unique feature, like they grow from the ground, and ours doesn't, then you can't learn it. However, aloim amarta, or according to this other girsa, which works a little easier, chada mechada. But if you're learning one thing from another, now the way they're viewing our case temporarily is that when they brought in kilei hakerem at the end, it's not to say the combination of all three, it's to say we're going to learn it all directly from kilei hakerem. So we're going to learn from kilei hakerem to basar b'chalav. Now, if it's a chada mechada, like in this case, well, if you learn one directly to the other, you can't say, oh, well, this has some feature and that has some feature. That's irrelevant. You can only be makshet kal v'chomer prachina. This has a chomer, like we did when we started with Orla. Oh, but Orla has a stringency. That's why we can't learn from there to basar b'chalav. So, kol shekain prachina, kal v'chomer prachina, kol dulo prachina. But you can't ask about a gidulei karka kind of feature. Okay? So then the Gemara says, "V'lifroch lekulu," but it wasn't all learned out from kilei hakerem. It was learned out from all three. And then you could say, "Ma lekulu shekain gidulei karka." Okay, so we're back to square one. It doesn't make any sense. In the end, it was learned from all three, not one from one. So we're going to wait. We're going to end here and wait till tomorrow to understand. In the end, we're going to have a rereading. Ela amar le Rav Mordechai le Rav Ashi hach amrina mishmei de Rish Lakish. He's going to say, no, I'm going to adapt what I said a little bit, fix it up, and then you'll understand the answer. So unfortunately, you have to wait till tomorrow. Okay, structure and summary of today's stuff. We've already been summarizing as we go along, so it's going to be pretty simple. From where do we get that basar b'chalav, once it's cooked, milk and meat together, you can't eat it, you can't benefit? We had a series of different answers, 6 altogether, and we're in the last one right now of Isi ben Yehuda, and we're in the part where he learned not the Isur Achila, which we already got, but the Isur, right, which he learned from a verbal analogy, Gezerah Shava, but the part about the benefit, which he learned from a combination of these three, and really it doesn't make sense because all those three have a unique feature to them, and that should be able to knock it out. But we're going to have to figure out tomorrow why that doesn't work as a knockout and why it actually is successful. And from there, we finish today's stuff. Wishing everyone a good day.